Hello, I'm Nancy Cordes in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Former President Donald Trump is still holding a press conference at his golf club in New Jersey right now. This is his second time speaking to reporters in a week. He said Vice President Harris's economic policies are causing a catastrophe. He has been using this time to deliver what he billed as economic remarks, but really he's been using that framework of the economy to make a series of untrue claims about his opponent, Kamala Harris. For instance, he said that she wants to turn America into a communist country. He said she wants to get rid of private health care, and he said she wants to abolish coal, oil, and natural gas. None of that is true. He has also been making a series of over-the-top claims, including that Kamala Harris broke the economy, broke the world, destroys everything she touches, and that there will be a 1929-style crash if she is elected. So that gives you a little bit of a flavor of what we've been listening to so far. Let's now take a listen to see what he's talking about now.
Had no way of getting them back. And I said, I want to get all of the MS-13 in particular out of our country, bring them back to where they came from. A general said, sir, that won't be possible. Why? Because they blocked the airports, they blocked the roads, they blocked everything. You can't do it. I said, so they're making a concerted effort? Yes, sir, they're making a concerted effort. We can't do it. They put planes on the runway so we can't land the planes, sir. And the same thing with the roads. They block up the roads. So if we have buses coming in, they block up the roads. They're totally blocked, and they're terrible. It's been that way for years, sir, all the way back to Bush. It's been that way for years. And I said, well, how much do we pay them in terms of economic development and aid? Sir, we pay them $750 million. I said, that's okay. Call them immediately and tell them we're not paying them anymore. And the following morning, I got a call from the three main culprits. Sir, I'd like to speak to you because I don't understand what the problem is. I said, well, you've sent us gang members, and they send them. Remember that. They send them. They said, you sent us gang members, you sent us killers, and you sent us drug dealers, and you send us horrible people. And
I want to bring in now Democratic strategist and Joel Payne and Republican strategist Matt Gorman to discuss everything we've been hearing. We have heard a lot. So just, right off the top, tell me about some of your thoughts. Matt, is this going to reassure Republicans throughout the party who have been saying you need to stay laser focused on the economy?
He tried, it wasn't certainly what I think always Nikki Haley would want. But, you saw him trying to make some comments there. He had groceries all around him. But as he said it, he put it well. He's not going to change. He's 78 years old. You expect him to change. It's not going to happen. So it's a matter of, OK, how much can you peel off of folks that are already kind of going for Kamala, or can you win them back? And what can you do with independents?
He can't help himself. He spent maybe the first 10 or 15 minutes of that conversation on some message, talking about the economy, trying to frame Kamala Harris. He got questions. He maybe spent 20, 30 seconds of the answers somewhat on message, and then he riffed for 10 minutes after. And he did it question after question after question. That's a microcosm of the election right now. If Donald Trump is not able to exhibit more message discipline, Kamala Harris and Democrats are going to be able to continue to tell a story that the American people want to hear unchallenged. Right now, that Donald Trump is not going to win an election.
What we heard over and over from him today was Kamala Harris is a socialist. She's a communist. She's worse than a communist. She wants to take us to Soviet policies or Venezuelan policies. Is that something that can stick, or is it so over the top that people will just laugh it off?
We use socialists and that sort of thing when I was at the NRCC with candidates down ballot. I don't think that hyperbole is actually, totally out of bounds. Because I think there's a difference between hyperbole and puffery and personal attacks, right? Like one is unproductive, right? The personal stuff, but also
she's obviously not a communist.
Yeah, I know, but it's not. It's hyperbole. It's obviously like the fate of democracy, lying in this. Like we use political argument and hyperbole to boost that. So that I'm okay with a little bit. It's when you kind of get into some other things that I think makes a lot of Republicans, from Kevin McCarthy to Vivek Ramaswamy to Nikki Haley, a little uneasy.
I think it's the style, right? It reminds people, I think, of the less focused Trump. The Trump before, in 2016, before his campaign had the, fifth reset, where they finally got focused on an economic populist message. It reminds people of the 2020 Trump and the post-2020 Trump, who denied the election and who has spent time attacking recently Brian Kemp in Georgia in a state that he needs. I think that's really what it probably signals to, I would imagine, some Republicans and to independents who the Kamala Harris message of future facing, looking forward, joy really appeals to those folks who want to turn the page on this era of politics. Donald Trump plays right into that.
Speaking of joy, Kamala Harris and her running mate, Tim Walz, appeared to try to do a bit of counter-programming today. Yeah. They knew that this press conference was coming, so they released a video of their own of the two of them just kind of chewing the fat, talking to each other about issues, but also just about their personal lives as well, and they released that. So let's take a look at some of that and then talk about it.
I was hoping
you,
maybe we wouldn't have to.
I called you, Tim.
Yes.
You didn't answer, Tim.
I know.
What happened?
The most important call of my life. It popped up, and we didn't recognize the caller ID, and it went to voicemail.
Hi, this is Tim. I'm not able to answer.
There you go.
Responsible. Thank you.
Hey, Tim, it's Kamala. I really want to talk to you.
So it seems like the goal here is to send a message, we're friends and we're happy.
Yeah, here's the thing, Nancy. You don't have to agree with Kamala Harris on economic policy. You don't have to agree with her on foreign policy. You don't have to agree with Tim Walz's record in Minnesota to see that those are two people who enjoy spending time together, who have personal chemistry, and who I think have a comedy towards each other that I think this country will respond well to. It does not mean they're going to win the election, but it does mean that that is a different conversation than the one we witnessed from Bedminster a few minutes ago. And I'd imagine that the folks who are running the Harris campaign want to counter-program what you're hearing from the Trump campaign with that. Vibes alone can't win an election, but it can go far to change the atmospherics around an election.
How worried are Republicans about the vibes?
I worry about the policies and the polls a little more. Vibes don't vote. But what I will say is, like, look, I worry about the message and how are you kind of coming across? And I think, look, we expect Kamala to have a very good week next week, as people tend to do coming out of convention. We did. But then once that happens, right, you're almost at Labor Day. You're at almost the first the debate between Harris and Trump. How can you fundamentally change dynamics? And how can you maybe, hopefully, make a case against Harris with likely she'll have a couple-point lead, most likely coming out of the convention?
We did learn one very interesting fact from former President Trump in this press conference. He was asked about his rehiring, I guess, of Corey Lewandowski, and he said that Lewandowski's role is going to be, quote, a personal envoy at some level. What is that?
Beats me. But what I also noticed before that, I think it was important, and I'm glad he did it. He did reassert, though, that Corey wasn't coming in to say layer over. Chris and Susie, who are the co-campaign managers, Chris Latsavita and Susie Wiles, he kind of reaffirmed their stature in the organization. Look, this has been a very well-run campaign, his best of the three. They're obviously on their heels a little bit right now, but again, I think having them at the top does help with a little bit of discipline organization-wide. I've
mentioned joy before. There's a lot of joy in Democratic circles that Corey Lewandowski is near the helms of the Trump campaign right now. I think that influence on Donald Trump feeds his worst instincts and is a bad one, and is one that Democrats will be happy to go against for the next 80-some-odd days.
His mantra is let Trump be Trump.
Yeah, and I think whether Corey Lewandowski was in the organization or not, Trump is 78 years old. You're not going to change him all of a sudden.
Fair enough. Well, Joel Payne, Matt Gorman, thank you so much for sticking around to discuss that press conference with me. I really appreciate it. Switching gears, Vice President Harris made her first appearance with President Biden since he dropped out of the race today. Willie James Inman joins us now from the White House to talk about that. Okay, Willie, Harris and Biden spoke about these new drug prices in front of a raucous crowd. These are the prices that have been negotiated by Medicare to bring certain drug prices down for seniors. Talk about this issue and how important it is to her campaign.
Hey there, Nancy. Well, 10 drugs in total were negotiated by the Biden administration to bring those prices down for consumers. I'll note that this doesn't go into effect, those new prices, rather, until 2026. But the Biden administration celebrating this move in something that they have been working on for quite some time. In fact, officials and Vice President Kamala Harris herself talked about that tie-breaking vote to bring about the Inflation Reduction Act, which the president signed into law that put this proposal and put this policy in place. And this is part of Vice President Harris's campaign as well. In fact, tomorrow, as Finn said, she's going to lay out some economic policies that would also include reducing those prices for prescription drugs, groceries. She's going to talk about food, those things that are simply too high, cost too much for many Americans across this country. She's going to go after the food industry, the grocery industry, also meat processors are something that she's going to talk about, empowering the FTC to essentially monitor all of this price gouging going on and these mergers and acquisitions. That's something that she's going to put forward in terms of a 100-day plan for an administration, a Harris administration, if she were to win the election.
Willie, when I was watching the event this afternoon, it really did feel like a changing of the guard. You had Vice President Harris speaking first, the president standing behind her. Now that they have held this event, which was the first since he dropped out of the race, how much more should we expect to see Biden on the campaign trail?
Yeah, I think your assessment, Nancy, is spot on. I mean, you saw these two candidates standing side by side on the stage there, holding hands, raising their hands, like this was a political moment. Although this was a White House official event, it very much sounded like a rally. I mean, they were greeted by not only those supporters in the room where they spoke, but they went to an overflow room to talk with several supporters there at the event. I anticipate we will see the president on the campaign trail. In fact, he addressed this earlier this week. He talked about visiting the state of Pennsylvania, which is really key to a Harris victory. He talked about touring the state with Governor Josh Shapiro there, who was also on the short list to be the vice president's running mate. He didn't, of course, make the final pick, but still, nonetheless, the president says he will campaign in the state of Pennsylvania or wherever else the vice president will have him campaign in other states. But the Harris campaign really hasn't given much in terms of where we can see them on the campaign trail or where President Biden will campaign. But he certainly has put himself out there, not only with this event, this White House official event, but saying that he will visit the battleground state of Pennsylvania soon to campaign for the vice president, Nancy.
Interesting. And the vice president will be back on the road tomorrow in North Carolina. Willie, James, Inman, Finn Gomez, thanks so much. We'll be talking to you soon. And mark your calendars. CBS News will be hosting a debate between vice presidential candidates Tim Walz and J.D. Vance on October 1st. Walz publicly accepted CBS News' invitation yesterday, and Vance did the same this morning. So that will be one to watch. Some of the most expensive drugs in the U.S. will be much more affordable beginning in 2026. Coming up, the Secretary of Health and Human Services will take us inside the White House's negotiations. Welcome back to America Decides. We're tracking a new wave of political enthusiasm among South Asian Americans. For the first time, they'll be represented at the top of a presidential ticket with Vice President Kamala Harris. Tomorrow, she will hold a rally in North Carolina where South Asians are the largest and fastest growing Asian voting bloc. To talk more about this, our Chanel Call joins us now. Chanel, I know you've been doing a deep dive. Thanks so much for joining us. How has this community responded to Harris entering the race?
Nancy, thanks for having me. There is so much energy around this. I mean, South Asian grassroots organizers from across the country that I've been speaking with in the last couple of weeks say they have never seen this level of enthusiasm, of energy, of excitement around an election. We've seen record donations, record turnout, and record representation. And speaking of representation, it's not just about Kamala Harris. We're seeing other big South Asian names emerge. Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, Usha Vance, also just this cycle rising to the national political conversation. We were in North Carolina last week, and I had a chance to speak with a young voter, someone who is of South Asian descent and voting for the first time in a presidential election this November. And she talked a little bit to me about what it feels like to see her culture represented on a presidential ticket.
What does this all mean to you? I just think the fact that we could have someone who looks like me in office, sorry, I'm like tearing up.
And you know, that resonance, that connection can also be seen, Nancy, online. I'm sure you've seen some of these memes, Lotus for POTUS. And if you didn't know this already, Kamala means lotus in Sanskrit. There's also Kamala Kisath, which means we're with Kamala.
Wow, and you could really feel the emotion and enthusiasm in that young woman's voice. Give us a sense, Chanel, of how important this emerging voting bloc is. How large is it?
Yeah, so Indian Americans are now the largest and fastest growing group of Asian voters. And in 2020, that block of voters actually exceeded the presidential margin of victory, which of course means their vote could be deciding this November. And while about 40% of Asian Americans lean left, almost all of them, 97%, say they prioritize policy over identity. So very much up for grabs.
Right, and with any voting bloc, no voting bloc is unanimous. There are always variations between voters. But based on your conversations and your research, what issues are most important to South Asians?
Right. So like a lot of other Americans, the economy is going to be top of mind this election. But you mentioned this community, like a lot of others here in America, is not a monolith. So we know that there are so many different religions, so many different countries that are part of the American South Asian community. And because of that, they have a lot of different opinions. For example, the war in Gaza. Take a listen. What does Kamala Harris need to say to win your vote?
A ceasefire in the war.
And what if she doesn't say that?
Then I think a lot of the Muslim population, at least I can speak for, and the Palestinian population, a lot of them have chosen not to vote.
And Nancy, immigration is also a really big issue for many South Asians. When I was speaking to a few when we were in North Carolina, they said to me, look, there are a lot of people that, for example, moved here from India. They immigrated here. They went through all of the right processes. They say they followed all the rules. And when they see what's happening on the southern border, they don't like it.
That's fascinating. So that means that their votes could be up for grabs by either side. So are the campaigns taking notice? What are they doing to try to attract these voters?
So this is really interesting, Nancy. In North Carolina, 80% of Asian Americans had never even been contacted by a party before 2016. But of course, as South Asians are sort of emerging as this growing influential voting bloc, you are seeing the campaigns, both Trump and Harris, starting to pay attention. Both campaigns told me that they value the South Asian vote, and the Harris campaign specifically is now having this outreach program where they're trying to reach South Asian voters where they're at.
That's so fascinating. Chanel Call, thank you so much. And we're going to see more of your reporting tomorrow on CBS Morning. So we're looking forward to that. Thanks so
Nancy.
much. Welcome back to America Decides. Today marks 3 years since the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. The Taliban marched straight into the capital of Kabul and has been in control of the country ever since. Ambassador Nasir Andisha joins us now. He's a former deputy foreign minister of Afghanistan from 2015 to 2019. Ambassador, thank you so much for being with us. Tell us, in your view, what is the situation in Afghanistan right now, 3 years after the withdrawal?
Well, thank you very much. The situation in Afghanistan has worsened rapidly since the withdrawal of U.S. and NATO forces and the military takeover of the country by the Taliban in all areas. Economically, now 50% of the population are living below poverty. The economy has contracted over 25 to 30%. In terms of the human rights and liberties, Afghanistan is now in the bottom of the United Nations list. Women are facing a situation which the UN Special Rapporteur called it gender apartheid, basically, where they are segregated completely and there is systematic repression and systematic discrimination against them. They can't work, they can't study beyond the 6 standards in schools. This whole merit of terrorist organization, including Al-Qaeda and ISIL and IMU, you just name it, the whole alphabet soup of terrorist organizations are living somehow under the ecosystem which Taliban has provided for them. And 1/4 of the country has actually left. According to the recent IOM reports data, 8 million Afghans have left the country. Majority of whom are living in the neighborhood, but almost 1 million has reached as far as the United States.
You paint a really grim picture. It's understandable. Recently, you wrote the country was abandoned like an orphan, and you say that Afghanistan has basically been pulled back into the dark ages. At this point, What, if anything, can the global community, should the global community do, particularly when it comes to the rights of women and girls in Afghanistan?
I think what the international community can do is they have to, after 3 years, stop the blame game. I know there is enough blame to go around in the case of Afghanistan. That who caused the failure? Was it the Republican, under Trump, who signed the deal with the Taliban and somehow legitimized them over, a democratically elected government, or it was, the Biden administration which pulled the plug and irresponsibly, executed that withdrawal without, looking after the consequences of this. And the regional countries, countries around Afghanistan, China, Iran, Russia, Pakistan, and the others, they are blaming the West and NATO altogether. And in the middle, the people of Afghanistan, of course, the leaders of the Afghan Republic also are to be blamed because of, they couldn't put the acts together. But in the middle, the people of Afghanistan are completely confused because they were working on the past 20 years with a hope of, a progressive and prosperous Afghanistan where people have their basic rights, where, the economy will move, where they could be part of, a world community. So now they feel abandoned, not only abandoned, but also blamed for the situation right now. I think this is time that hopefully, with the election in the United States and also with some of the changes, in the region, that the world could put the acts together and they can deal with the Taliban, which is, part of it is a designated terrorist group. And now their regime is a regime of gender apartheid in the way they deserve. Right now, everybody is appeasing Taliban, unfortunately.
Is there any threat to the Taliban when it comes to ruling that country for years to come?
Oh, certainly, definitely. Taliban are like any other autocratic regime around the world, and they're very fragile. It's a very small group of fanatics and religious extremists. Doesn't make even 1% of the country altogether, in terms of their own networks and networks of extremists. And so the way that they control the country is, one is that, they are being left with all these military equipments, which billions worth of equipment. The second thing is, they are cohesive enough because they were cohesive in their fights, which part of their fight was, suicide bombing and going to extreme, but also they had, some sort of logistical safe havens and military support within the countries in the region. But now that's supplemented with the whole support which comes from different parts of the world, including the United States. So somehow their lifelines, economic lifelines, are coming from outside, and their religious support is coming from the region. So they don't have very strong roots in the country the way we saw after 9/11. It was people of Afghanistan themselves what chased them out. So like any other dictatorship around the world, they're very fragile. They're even more fragile because they don't have an economy like the other countries who can bank on their own domestic resources. But it's the confusion. It's sort of a race to bottom between regional countries and the international community, Western countries, that they are thriving. It's the confusion, it's the indifference of the world toward them that they're consolidating.
Right, the attention of Western countries diverted to other conflicts like Ukraine and the Middle East. Ambassador Nasir Andisha, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.
The White House says it has, quote, beat Big Pharma after Medicare reached agreements with drug manufacturers to lower the prices of 10 of the most expensive drugs in the United States. According to the Department of Health and Human Services, Americans will save about $100 billion over 10 years as a result of these negotiations. However, these new prices will not go into effect until 2026. Health and Human Services Secretary Javier Becerra is here to delve into all of this and more. His agency oversees Medicaid and Medicare. Hello to you, Mr. Secretary. Thanks so much for joining us. You were right in the middle of all of this. So take us into the negotiations that led to these new drug prices. What were the talks like? Were some drug companies easier to negotiate with than others?
Nancy, it helps when the team is prepared. We did a lot of homework. We got a lot of information. We spoke to a lot of people. And so when we went in, we were fairly prepared, and that made for some good conversations. We made some offers and counter offers on both sides, and what we're able to do is get this done on the timeline Congress set for us. And 10 drugs, 10 negotiations, 10 reduced prices. That's a good a mark, and I think it's a good omen for what can come when it comes to drug negotiation.
Why these 10 drugs in particular, Xarelto, Jardiance, Eliquis, what have you? And why were you able to secure, say, a 79% reduction in price for some drugs, like the diabetes drug Januvica, and then a smaller price reduction of 38% for something like a blood cancer drug Imbruvica?
So the why those 10, Congress was pretty clear in its direction in the law on how to select the drugs. The 10 most expensive drugs in the Medicare program, of the 3,500 plus drugs, these are the 10 most expensive. So expensive that just those 10 out of more than 3,500 take up more than a fifth of all the costs that are spent on drugs in the Medicare program. And so these are some familiar names, and they're very important drugs to many people: diabetes, heart disease, stroke, kidney failure, all the types of conditions that really are critical, cancer. And so when it came to the negotiations, we took a number of things into account. And I must, again, remind you that very rarely do you pay sticker price for anything, whether it's prescription medication or whether it's a car at a dealership or whether it is the clothes that you're going to buy in the department store. You usually can get it for far better price, especially if you can negotiate. And now that we can negotiate, we got a far better price.
Have you already identified the next 10 drugs that you want to negotiate? Are they just the next 10 most expensive after these?
We will be announcing that by February of next year. CMS, our Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services folks, our team will go through the same process to identify the next set of drugs, and we will announce that, and we're going to be transparent as we were with this first set of drugs.
Secretary Becerra, how much difference is this going to make for seniors when you already have a $2,000 annual cap on prescription drug costs that is going to go into effect next year anyway?
Yeah, Nancy, that's a great question, because people are going to begin to realize just how fantastic this Inflation Reduction Act by President Biden and Vice President Harris really is. Because it's not just that today insulin is capped at $35 for a full month's supply for people on Medicare, which is big news already. It's not just that today the overall total amount that you'll pay out of pocket is about $3,500. And for folks who are on a cancer drug, for example, $3,500, it could be 1 or 2 months worth of that cancer drug. But the fact that in 2025, in just a few months, the overall total cap that you can spend on drugs out of pocket will be $2,000. That's going to be a great thing. But here now with the negotiations, what we get to do is not just save the Medicare program a lot of money. In this case, just 1 year of negotiation on 10 drugs, it's about $6 billion. On top of that, there are the savings that Americans on Medicare will save by not having to pay as much out of pocket, because some of these drugs are pretty expensive out of pocket. Sometimes you have to pay 25, 30% of the cost of the drug. And so that could add up. The fact that that will occur, the savings will occur for out-of-pocket expenses as well. We estimate about $1.5 billion for the Americans who use those particular drugs on Medicare. That's savings that stays in their pocket on top of the $6 billion that we're saving the Medicare program. Good stuff. But overall, it's everything the Inflation Reduction Act does that really will help Americans when it comes to drug costs.
Right. A savings for Medicare is a savings for taxpayers. Secretary Becerra, you were at the event in Maryland today that President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris held together. Tell me a little bit about your working relationship with Vice President Harris. How extensive has the relationship between the two of you been over the past few years?
The Vice President and I have worked very closely. Our teams have worked very closely since we've both been here in Washington, D.C. in the administration. Remember, the Vice President was our point person on reproductive rights. And so she's been out there. I've been out there because Health and Human Services has been impacted by this. We've worked together on maternal health because we've got a real big focus on improving the condition, health condition for women and their babies. And that's something that the vice president has been on top of as well. So on many occasions, we've been to the same parts of the country working together, and we've focused on some of the same issues. I've known her since she was senator. I've known her since she was the attorney general. I took over as attorney general of California when she became the senator for the state. And so we've worked together for a long time, long working relationship. I've known her well, thrilled for her. And now we know she's going to focus on some of the things that HHS considers priorities.
You mentioned that you're the former Attorney General of California. You're also the former congressman from California. I know you've been mulling a bid for governor of California in a couple of years. Is there any news you'd like to make here on America Decides?
Well, if I were to make news here today, Nancy, you would put me in real trouble with the law, because when you are working in the federal government under the law called the Hatch Act, I can't be out there talking about doing campaigns and doing political stuff. So I am secretary, and I'm thrilled that the president gave me a chance to do this. I will continue to be secretary as long as that lasts. After that, we'll see. But I appreciate your asking. It's a pretty rewarding thing for folks to say, "Hey, are you thinking of doing this or that?" And when it's something like governor or secretary of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, that's a nice little treat.
Well, when you are ready and able to talk about it, we hope you'll come back. Secretary Xavier Becerra, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that does it for today. I'll be back all next week, live from the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Join us. Our special coverage begins at 5 p.m. Eastern and will continue right here on CBS News 24/7 all evening long. And stay with us tonight. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.